It takes more than good food to be healthy. Health starts from the inside. Yes, from the inside of your home. Comfort and natural spaces stimulate your brain to feel good, and they are the best alternative for you to be healthy, at least in terms of mental peace. That's why today we're going to talk about biophilic design and architecture. Let's start with the basics for those new to the subject. Biophilia is not a paraphilia, but it's something related to people and living things because it's a natural lifestyle and much more aesthetic. It's a way of building and bringing life to a place, but beyond any trend created by groups and influencers. It's being developed based on architects, theorists, and scientific researchers with the help of design professionals. We're talking about a large group of minds coming together with the intention of creating this new way of living. But first, let's talk about the most fundamental elements of this style. It's all about reconnecting people with nature, but without cutting the umbilical cord of our current society, which is civilization. In other words, this style of architecture and design seeks to distance itself from the urban concept. Let's remember that urban refers to the conglomeration of societies gathered in one place, and around this has been built an idiosyncrasy that is a bit more intense and focused on the concrete and artistic movements that generate trends and ultimately fashions of generic structures supported by nothing. The most beautiful thing is something healthy, something with foundations and structures, and these are solidified. But before we go any further, we need to clarify something. Eco-design and biophilic design are completely different, because I know that may have crossed some people's minds. They have some similarities, but they are not completely synonymous. For example, we can talk about biophilic design as something that doesn't focus so much on aspects of making the building more energy efficient, building it with ecological materials, and maintaining a natural aesthetic, all in a balanced set, but rather focuses on people. Yes, while eco-design seeks to build a natural environment, biophilic design focuses on making people feel comfortable in that place. Because that is our premise, how our environment affects us as individuals. It's nice to think about a more natural place, but it doesn't do us any good if we don't feel comfortable in it. Even the name suggests this, and it connects in a very interesting way with the bioformist movement. It uses 5 primal elements as a species that we've had since ancient times: perspective, protection, mystery, and risk or danger, which is what nature is made of. And how can this be applied to a house? Well, it's too simple. From this perspective, you can have open spaces, places to look out, or a well-organized and intuitive environment that pleases the eye. On the other hand, it must be a shelter. It must have places where you can rest and feel comfortable. But why mystery, risk, and danger? Because absolute comfort or tranquility leads to degradation. Something very safe makes us lazy. Look at our society today. Of course, you're not going to add a tiger, but you can add areas with less light and details that create a little uncertainty. But we're going to show you that now with more examples. This is where biophilia starts, to become complete madness later. And a biophilic house has to do 3 things: reduce stress, have cognitive performance, and generate controlled emotions in the person. That's why the 4 situations mentioned before are so important, because they generate them in certain spaces. But do you know what else creates them? Light. You have no idea how much light affects us. Well, the sun tells us to be awake, and the night tells us to be asleep. So biophilia takes advantage of this concept to build dynamic or natural lights to generate this and help our natural daily rhythms, from eating to sleeping. Besides, you can't deny that it looks beautiful to have a well-lit place. And having spaces that lead us to natural places or the outdoors, whether it's a roof, the garden, and so on, that's pleasant. This is called a visual connection to nature because, believe it or not, such a peaceful place lowers blood pressure, helps with our visual attention, and according to Barton and Pretty, 2 researchers, explains that it positively affects our attitude and happiness. We also need to know how to play with our environment, because visuals are not the only things we need to feel good about. Things like sound, smell, touch itself, having grass-shaped carpets, and having a space with little outside noise to minimize city noise are just as important as the visual connection with nature and help in the same way. Then we have things like the presence of water, which is literally a primary element in nature, which can reduce stress, improve concentration, and enhance our positive reactions, all from psychological studies by an overwhelming series of scientists, architects, and designers, which leads us to ask ourselves. And this brings us to inclusive design, which is not something of a social nature but personal. Here we have to talk minimally about how nature influences the form and how biomorphic art is used, which, yes, turned out to be important for the shape of the house, like some objects, textures found in nature, and that sensation of grass, trees, and stones. But what's important is that these are houses whose shapes are somewhat exotic. They don't have a barrier or a defined shape. They live in a slightly asymmetrical but harmonious environment. Aren't lakes beautiful? Well, yes, of course they are, but they're not symmetrical. There's not the same amount of trees, and the lake is not round. There are rocks and odd shapes, because that's how biophilic places are. But within that disorder, there is an order. That's why they use bioform as a base, because it's an artistic movement, and all movements have an order and an intention behind why things are arranged the way they are. So it simulates nature, but it's still a beautiful and welcoming house. Not to mention that they would be perfect places for meditation, because instead of having a meditation room, it's a whole house that invites you to be at peace and mindful. If we use the previous elements, like risk, to have a little bit of adrenaline and generate a little bit of dopamine, that keeps us alert. It serves to meditate, to be attentive, and to be calm and excited, all without being invasive. What more could you ask for? But what if I told you that this architecture goes beyond simple houses and apartments? Yes, everything I've described to you now can be used for a house or for a whole city, a park, whatever, because it's a kind of art, a kind of movement, a kind of architecture. So it's something that goes beyond a simple house and can extend to common spaces and common areas. And so it's the perfect place for social interaction. It's perfect. That's why this is by far the most beautiful and valuable of all the designs we've talked about, because it goes beyond and becomes something that could be developed in a city. But tell us what you think. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. See you next time.